This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Let's just jump right into it.
Today, I'm signing an executive order encouraging police departments nationwide to adopt the highest professional standards to serve their communities.
President Trump signed an executive order today aimed at addressing police misconduct across the country. The order will create a database to track officers with use of force complaints, and it will establish a system to incentivize police departments to adopt best practices. This comes as protesters called for defunding police departments, something the Trump administration isn't down for.
Everybody right here is saying enough is enough.
Protesters are calling for greater police accountability after the Atlanta Police Department said the officer who shot and killed a black man outside of Wendy's last week had been given a written warning for use of force in a 2016 case. Add that on to 4 citizens' complaints that never resulted in disciplinary action for Officer Garrett Rolfe, who was fired this weekend.
The New Mexico Civil Guard is out here assaulting peaceful protesters.
New Mexico's governor says vigilantes are to blame for the violence that led to a shooting at a protest over the statue of a Spanish conquistador. One man has been arrested for the shooting in Albuquerque that left 1 victim in critical condition. The governor has vowed to root out the instigators, saying she is horrified and disgusted at the violence prompted by armed individuals who called themselves civil guards at the protests. And if you're looking for a little in-flight buzz, you might consider bringing your own. A number of airlines, including American and Delta, have partly suspended alcohol sales. It's less about turning passengers into teetotalers and more about limiting interaction because of COVID-19. When some of the protests for George Floyd descended into chaos, President Trump blamed the violence on Antifa, a far-left group whose name is short for anti-fascist. The group also doesn't have any formal organization. An FBI report says the group wasn't involved in DC protests, but that hasn't stopped people from asking about their involvement and motivations during demonstrations across the country. Newsy's Sasha Ingber spoke to one member of the group and has this story.
President Trump and his supporters see far-left group Antifa as a grave threat to national security. Antifa members say they're being scapegoated.
We're not actually a terrorist group or whatever.
Newsy spoke to Lacey McCauley, a longtime and unusually open anti-fascist activist, after the president declared his desire to designate Antifa a terrorist organization, a label that by law cannot be applied to a domestic group.
Right now, some of my friends and family are like a little worried for me, of course. Like, no level of silence is going to benefit me right now.
Macaulay says the secrecy of most black-clad members isn't just about avoiding police detection. They could lose their jobs for their activism, especially now as the Trump administration and far-right media outlets seek to portray Antifa as an organized and violent group.
They were getting this tradecraft from someone else, someone with much more experience, someone who did this for a living.
Antifa, which traces back to Europe in the days after Hitler and Mussolini, has no membership card or central organization.
Antifa don't subscribe to the sort of predominant liberal values about respecting the opinions of your political opponents. They believe that given the history of the Holocaust and slavery and so forth, that white supremacist and fascist ideas aren't deserving of their respect. And in that way, they seek to do whatever is necessary to prevent these ideas from gaining a greater foothold in society.
That philosophy has led some to damage property and get into physical confrontations. Antifa has also earned the full attention of the FBI.
We, the FBI, have quite a number of ongoing investigations of violent anarchist extremists, including those motivated by an Antifa or Antifa-like ideology, and we categorize and treat those as domestic terrorism investigations.
Of 51 arrests made for federal crimes arising out of the protests, the FBI and Justice Department declined to tell Newsy just how many were linked to Antifa. Journalists have found no links. Observers fear legislation to allow the president to designate domestic groups as terrorist organizations would silence constitutionally protected dissent.
It has the threat of expanding that kind of criminalization or demonization to the entire radical left, since it's so unclear who is or is not Antifa, that in a kind of worst case scenario, anyone who has a politics to the left of Joe Biden could be viewed as a terrorist.
Antifa members haven't killed anyone, and linking them to terrorism, as the president and social media posts have, is already impacting the country. In Washington state, a sheriff's office says one multiracial family was asked if they were Antifa members and followed with vehicles and what appeared to be semi-automatic rifles. In Colorado,
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Police say a guy in Loveland held two people at gunpoint that he thought were members of Antifa. Turns out they were roofing company employees working in his neighborhood.
For Macaulay, who says she's been harassed online and subjected to death threats, the work continues.
I'm not afraid.
Sasha Ingber, Newsy, Washington.
The devil is in the details when it comes to how and when sports leagues can finally restart.
We're working hard to get you the news you need.
We dig a little deeper on the stories of the day.
That's why we're here.
To help start making sense of it all.
Miss getting email that isn't junk? You should know about Newsy's daily newsletter. It's breaking news right to your inbox. Get caught up quick with the best Newsy stories every day. Join us at signup.newsy.com. Be informed.
Google can tell us a lot of things. It can tell us the worst case scenario with that seemingly minor injury, or show us exactly what a tardigrade looks like. They look like this, by the way. Fascinating. But Google's trends can also tell us what other people are curious about. Here's a quick look. There are symbolic gestures to show you're pissed, and then there's this. People are Googling North Korea because the country recently blew up its liaison office with South Korea, another sign of deteriorating diplomacy between the two countries. The building was empty and North Korea already signaled they were going to blow it up, but you gotta admit that's just a really dramatic breakup move on a geopolitical scale. Shake Shack is trending, but not because of their Shack sauce. 3 New York City police officers were released from the hospital Monday night after drinking milkshakes that they believed were tainted with bleach. New York City police unions put Shake Shack on blast Monday night, implying this was an intentional poisoning of the officers. But the NYPD says actually an investigation shows it was just accidental, likely a cleaning substance that wasn't fully cleared from a milkshake machine. Still, Shake Shack says they're horrified by the whole thing and are looking into it. This one's a little easier to say than hydroxychloroquine, isn't it? No. People are Googling Dexamethasone after researchers in England reported there's evidence the drug can increase COVID-19 survival rates. The drug is described as a cheap and widely available steroid that reduced deaths up to 1/3 in hospital patients that were severely ill. Researchers say they're preparing to publish the full results of testing. With US sports making a comeback, there are a lot of variables to consider to keep everyone safe. As Newsy's Austin Kim explains, that's easier for some sports than others.
The thing I miss most in the summer is baseball.
There are a number of health professionals who can't wait for sports to come back.
I have not missed a Dolphins game in 25 years.
But in the showdown between emotion and public health and safety, they know which side they need to support.
I also have to think about my role as an epidemiologist and a public health person, and are we adding too much risk by bringing any sport back?
So they're keeping their eyes on how certain sports plan to resume play. And those plans vary.
It's about whether or not it's inside or outside, how many people are involved, and the level of contact between players.
Which is why some sports have been able to resume their schedule already. Right now, NASCAR and the PGA are both proceeding with weekly events in different cities. These organizations are taking precautions, which include strict social distancing measures.
The overarching goal here is not just to protect the people involved in the league, but also make sure that you're not a threat to public health more broadly.
For other leagues, it'll require a transformation. The NBA, NHL, MLS, and the National Women's Soccer League plan to isolate their teams in 1 or 2 cities. They'll all play in a tournament or start postseason competition.
The devil is going to be in the details.
Dr. Bruce Farber is the chief of infectious diseases at Northwell Health in New York. He's an informal medical consultant to the NHL, but he is not designing the league's plan to return. Right now, the NHL is slated to start the Stanley Cup playoffs in 2 hub cities with limits on who can be around the team and where they can eat, sleep, and play.
In general, I think everyone's taking this seriously. I think everyone knows we're in a whole different era than we were 6 months ago. And although the policies and procedures and ideas may be correct, the execution has to be really very careful and methodical.
Farber warns many of these plans haven't been finalized because there are so many variables. He adds frequent testing will be critical, but that has its own issues.
If you tested everybody right in the beginning of the practice, right in the beginning of the play, and you had that result immediately, you could really limit how many people are going to be exposed and have to go out of play. And the question is that going to be available? And the answer is it's not clear.
And then there's the inevitable scenario, when someone tests positive.
I think that setting something as specific as one person means that the league or the team shuts down is overly restrictive. Every league and every team needs to be prepared to shut down at any time. But where the leagues really have the ability to do well at this is by keeping very accurate lists of everybody that this person has been in contact with. And then it is classic gumshoe epidemiology to then go through, isolate all those people that are on the contact lists and test them all.
This is all operating under the assumption there are no fans at the events, but both the PGA and LPGA may allow fans at events next month. Health experts say that could work given the fact golf is outside and there is a lot of space. However, NASCAR's plan to have limited attendance is a concern for Dr. Binney.
If we put 5,000 people into Talladega and we don't see an explosive outbreak from that, that's perfectly possible and even normal, okay? Because this disease has what we would call a lot of stochasticity to it, which is just a fancy word for randomness. We need to understand that holding one race with fans is not evidence that continuing to hold races with fans is safe.
Both Dr. Binney and Dr. Snow-Newman say they hope other leagues such as Major League Baseball and the National Football League can get a season in, but they say it's too soon to tell. For Newsy, I'm Austin Kim in Chicago.
You've got burning questions about COVID-19? We've got answers.
We're gonna go deep.
We drove across the state to get here. We're working hard to get you the news you need.
We dig a little deeper on the stories of the day
That's why we're here.
to help start making sense of it all.
By this point, a lot of people have had COVID-19. For people who've recovered, one big question is, can I still spread the disease? Newsy's Lindsay Thies has the answer.
When it comes to getting sick with COVID-19, you might be thinking about this, and we have two. Anthony emailed us asking, some people in my office tested positive for COVID-19. They were treated and released from the hospital after recovering completely and were told that they can return to work. Can they transmit the coronavirus to others when they come to the office? We asked the experts. Their take, contracting COVID-19 from working with someone recovered from COVID-19 is low risk.
They should really be seeing their doctor, get the clearance to go back to work so we minimize that exposure there.
Depending on how long it is from the time that they develop symptoms, may or may not be infectious. So if your coworker was sick within the last week or 10 days, the likelihood that they're still shedding virus that could get you sick is much higher than, for instance, if they were sick a few weeks or months ago.
Nobody should be returning to work until they've been cleared either by public health or their provider, or at least somebody who knows how to assess when it's safe and appropriate to go back to work. As long as somebody is coming back and has achieved the amount of time required to be asymptomatic, then the risk is very low.
If you have a question about your risk, email us a video question to what'stherisk@newsy.com.
Businesses and economies are, of course, opening back up all over the country, but in some cases, they're reopening a little too quickly, skirting local rules and guidelines and just making people kind of uncomfortable. Newsy's Stephanie Sandoval shows how New York City has become a hotspot for this kind of thing.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo said the state has received 25,000 complaints about businesses violating the state's reopening plan by not requiring masks or social distancing.
What's alarming about the 25,000 is the volume, but it also shows how smart people are and how offended people are that they're calling and complaining.
On Sunday, Cuomo said this is especially true at bars and restaurants. He said he's even called some of those bars or restaurants after people sent him photos.
This is a question of violating the law. Not just feel guilty. You're violating the law.
He said a bar or restaurant can lose their liquor license if they violate the rules, and that inspectors and task force members are enforcing this.
A bar or restaurant that is violating these rules can lose their liquor license. State Liquor Authority inspectors are out. We have a task force of state investigators who are out. You can lose your liquor license. And that is a big deal for a bar or a restaurant. We are not kidding around with this.
For Newsy, I'm Stephanie Sandoval.
When you're back, garbage.
We're working remotely, but our mission hasn't changed.
Newsy's here for you.
Newsy is here for you.
From our living rooms
And our kitchens.
24/7, focused on facts and not hype.
Be informed.
Not influenced.
By now, experts know pollution and air quality are a factor in how deadly COVID-19 can be. For instance, one study showed if New York City had lowered its air pollution over the last 20 years by just a single unit, it would have seen hundreds of fewer deaths from the pandemic. And one rarely talked about source of air pollution are waste incinerators. A recent Newsy documentary digs into their impact and shows one man's fight to clean up his community's air.
I drive past the incinerator every day, twice a day, going to and from work. Sometimes the stench is so bad that if I have my windows rolled down, I have to roll them up.
Baltimore is one of the most polluted cities in America, and the worst of that pollution hangs over the south side. This part of town is packed with industrial sites, including the city's single largest source of industrial air pollution, the Wheelabrator Waste Incinerator.
We have foul, polluted air from these incinerators.
But last year, Baltimore became one of the first U.S. cities to pass its own Clean Air Act after a push from the city council and local residents. The new law has set up a battle over the future of the incinerator.
It provides hope for a community like mine who have served as the brunt of environmental pollution for at least 3 decades. If I think back about family members and how they left this earth, I can remember or know that my father died of cancer. My mom passed away from kidney disease. A neighbor down the street passed away due to heart problems. We know that death occurs. It's supposed to happen as we age. But I oftentimes wonder, had not the incinerator been located so close to us, whether or not these folks would have lived longer or had a better quality of life.
The company that operates the Wheelabrator Waste Incinerator declined an interview with Newsy. But it publicly argues that Baltimore's new Clean Air Act is overly restrictive and will lead to worse waste management and lost jobs. They filed a federal lawsuit to stop the act.
Will certainly have the effect of closing Wheelabrator, and will be a choice by the council of long haul and landfill disposal.
The waste incinerator in South Baltimore has operated for more than 30 years. Each day, the incineration process is repeated. Up to 2,250 tons of recycled waste is taken in. The waste is burned to generate electricity, and that electricity then powers homes and businesses throughout Baltimore. And because it technically operates as a source of renewable energy, the incinerator receives clean energy subsidies from the state of Maryland. But the incinerator is also a major source of air pollution, including particulate matter and chemicals, which contributes to rates of heart disease, lung cancer, and stroke for nearby communities.
So if you think about Baltimore, Baltimore has a number of industrial hazards that emit criteria air pollutants like particulate matter, and also hazardous air pollutants like many metals like arsen, lead, and mercury. Particulate matter is very dangerous because it can cause asthma attacks, elevate your blood pressure. It can cause stroke, it can cause heart disease. It also can cause cancer. So you're incinerating and disproportionately impacting one community, and usually that community is a community of color, a low-income community, and maybe a community that has limited political power, a limited economic power. These types of hazardous materials end up going to communities that are invisible, who don't have a voice. Race is the most significant predictor of whether or not you'll have one of these industrial hazards. So it's all about race. You know, when you think about racism, think about segregation, for example. Segregation leads to a concentration of social risks, economic risks, political risks, and health risks. So we're basically putting a cap on the potential of children who are exposed to lead, right? Instead of the future doctors, lawyers, scientists like me, those kids may not reach their full potential. And that's why living near an incinerator, like the incinerator in Baltimore, that's a source of lead, is a problem. To me, the solution to this issue, we have to think about incineration, but we also have to think about energy equity in general. And that includes moving away from incineration and really bringing more infrastructure, solar, wind, renewables, electrified vehicles, really bringing more sustainable energy systems to communities that are overburdened by hazards. They deserve that.
Wheelabrator has challenged Baltimore's Clean Air Act in federal court, saying the power to regulate emissions lies with the state and federal government, not the city. While that battle plays out in the courts, the enforcement of the city's Clean Air Act has been put on hold, and the incinerator remains open.
That's it for In the Loop. I've got to go carry on with my social life via video chat, but we've got some more top stories from Newsy headed your way now.